There are parts of the Bible people really preach on, not because they are unimportant, but because they are mysterious, wrapped in ancient language, strange imagery, and unanswered questions. The story of the Nephilim is one such chapter. It begins in Genesis 6, only 4 short verses, yet those verses shake the foundation of the human story. When human beings began to increase in number on the earth, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, men of renown. Who were these sons of God? Who were the Nephilim? And why does this mysterious rise of hybrid giants lead directly into one of the most cataclysmic events in all of Scripture, the Great Flood? Today, we will travel back to the earliest days of humanity. We will look at the text, the ancient interpretations, and the historical echoes found in cultures all over the world. And by the end, you will see why the story of the Nephilim is not just about the past. It may also be a prophetic picture of our future.
The world before the flood. To understand the rise of the Nephilim, we must first understand the world they entered. The pre-flood world, or the antediluvian age, was unlike anything we know. According to Genesis 5, people lived for centuries. The earth was fresh from creation, lush, full of life. Humanity had been told, "Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth." And they did. Villages became towns, and towns perhaps became the first cities. Music, craftsmanship, and trade existed, but so did pride, greed, and violence. Genesis 6:11 tells us, "Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight, and was full of violence." This corruption was not slow erosion. It was a rapid moral collapse. And then there's the phrase, B'nai Ha-Elohim, sons of God. The same phrase appears in Job 1:6 and Job 2:1 to describe heavenly beings presenting themselves before the Lord. Early Jewish thought, preserved in works like the Book of Enoch and Jubilees, interpreted Genesis 6 literally. Some angels left their assigned domain and descended to earth. The early church fathers like Justin Martyr and Irenaeus agreed. These sons of God crossed a divine boundary, taking human women, producing offspring that were neither fully human nor fully angelic. Others later, like Augustine, argued the sons of God were men from the godly line of Seth, who married women from the ungodly line of Cain. But this Sethite view leaves unanswered the strange result, the Nephilim, beings of unusual size and power.
The Forbidden Union. The Book of Enoch names the leader of these angels as Semjaza. It records an oath sworn by 200 angels atop Mount Hermon to carry out their plan. Their sin was twofold: lust for human women and the corruption of humanity through forbidden knowledge. They taught the forging of weapons, bringing organized warfare to the world. They taught sorcery and divination, opening spiritual doors humanity could not close. They taught the use of cosmetics and jewelry to entice and corrupt. What began as beauty became an instrument of manipulation. Jude 1, verses 6 through 7 echoes this, saying that angels did not keep their positions of authority, but abandoned their proper dwelling and were punished for sexual immorality in a similar way to Sodom. From this union came the Nephilim. These were not mere tall men, they were hybrids, the heroes of old, men of renown, dominating human society with their size, strength, and influence. Ancient cultures outside the Bible tell similar stories: the Greek Titans, the Sumerian Apkallu, the Gilgamesh epic, all speaking of giant rulers who were divine part human.
The Age of Giants was not a small footnote in history. It was a full-scale takeover. These beings were more than tall warriors. They were the apex of physical, political, and spiritual power in the ancient world. Genesis 6:4 gives us a tantalizing glimpse. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days. They were the heroes of old, men of renown. That word renown suggests they were not just known, they were revered, feared, and remembered long after they were gone. Ancient tradition fills in the blanks. The Book of Enoch portrays them as beings of staggering proportions, said to be hundreds of feet tall. Whether this is literal or symbolic, the point is clear. They were fearsome and overwhelming. Imagine men whose heads could be seen above city walls, whose footsteps shook the ground, and whose strength could uproot trees as easily as a child might pluck a weed. Their physical dominance allowed them to rule as kings, warriors, and tyrants. They didn't just command armies, they were the armies. With their sheer size and power, resistance was crushed before it could begin. They controlled trade routes, food supplies, and access to land. Whole populations lived under their shadow, both literally and figuratively. But the Nephilim's dominance was not purely physical. It was cultural and spiritual. They positioned themselves as divine rulers. Through intimidation and awe, they fostered idolatry, presenting themselves as gods on earth. Temples and shrines rose in their honor, and humanity, dazzled by their might, turned away from the Creator to worship the creation. Violence became the language of the day. Wars were waged for sport, not just necessity. Human blood was spilled without conscience, and cruelty was celebrated as strength. The very concept of justice was twisted. The strong decided what was right, and the weak had no voice. Some archaeologists and historians speculate that certain ancient wonders could be linked, directly or indirectly, to the Nephilim. The colossal stones at Baalbek in Lebanon, each weighing hundreds of tons, and the massive tombs in Bashan, an area the Bible associates with giants, spark questions about who could have built them. While no conclusive proof ties these works to the Nephilim, the scale and mystery surrounding such sites match the ancient descriptions of a race with superhuman strength and ambition. Their reign brought an irreversible moral collapse. People no longer looked to the God who created them. They looked up, quite literally, to the giants in their midst. And in doing so, humanity sealed its fate, setting the stage for the greatest act of divine judgment in human history.
God's judgment and the Great Flood. Genesis 6:5 shows us God's heartbreak. The Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become, and that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time. This was more than human rebellion. The very order of creation was under attack. The Nephilim were a breach in the boundary between heaven and earth, and if left unchecked, they would corrupt all flesh. God's response was decisive. He chose Noah, described in Genesis 6:9, as righteous and blameless. Many scholars see blameless here as more than moral purity. Perhaps it means Noah's bloodline remained untainted by the Nephilim's corruption. The flood was not just a judgment on sin, it was a cleansing of the earth from an unnatural hybrid race. For 40 days and 40 nights, waters covered the earth, wiping out all living things except those preserved in the ark. The Nephilim were destroyed, or so it seemed.
After the flood, the return of the giants. Numbers 13:33 shocks us centuries later. We saw the Nephilim there. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes. How could they be back? Two main theories emerge. Fallen angels repeated their sin after the flood, or the bloodline survived through the wives of Noah's sons. Whatever the mechanism, giant clans appear in Scripture: the Anakim, the Rephaim, the Zamzumim. Deuteronomy 3 describes King Og of Bashan's bed as over 13 feet long. Joshua's campaigns involved driving these people out. Caleb, at age 85, claimed the hill country of Hebron, home of the Anakim. The most famous descendant is Goliath of Gath, whom David struck down with a sling and a stone, proving that faith, not size, determines victory. The rise of the Nephilim is not just ancient history. Jesus warned in Matthew 24:37, "As it was in the days of Noah, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man." The days of Noah were marked by violence, corruption, and a crossing of divine boundaries. Today we see echoes: the pursuit of forbidden knowledge, the blending of human and non-human DNA and science, the moral collapse of societies, and the spiritual deception that blinds nations. The Book of Enoch says the spirits of the dead Nephilim became disembodied, wandering the earth as evil spirits, what we call demons. This gives new weight to Paul's warning in Ephesians 6:12 that we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against spiritual forces of evil. The lesson is clear. Boundaries matter. When humanity rejects God's design, we open the door to destruction. But just as God preserved Noah, He preserves His own today. Our hope is not in our strength, but in the one who conquered the ultimate enemy.